today. I'm Catherine Pfeifer, and I'm presenting on behalf of Simon Marcus, who actually was the principal scientist behind this work. And you're going to realize very quickly in my presentation that I have a very different background. And by following the presentation before me, I just realized I will need to adjust my presentation on the spot. So please cope with me. I wanted to come in today and tell you about climate change and about how it's going to create winners and losers. Well, funnily, showing you who is going to be the winners and who is going to be the losers in dairy. Well, what is not written on this slide, what's hidden in this slide, is different assumption of what resilience is. When I listen to the people before me, they're talking about resilience, about this animal being able to cope with climate change, which is basically making that animal robust so that it can cope with what's going on. I am not going to talk about animals. I'm going to talk about farms. Well, you know, that's the place where you keep those animals. Well, once you move from the animal to the farm, things look completely different. Resilience is still about being able to cope with this climate change, but we recognize that there's 3 different ways to actually cope with that climate change. The first is about being robust, and I think that's about your story, about animals that can cope with climate. But there's more than that. You can also be adaptable, which means you could change things on your farm, not just your animals, but other things on your farms, so that you could cope with those shocks. For example, you could change what you feed to your animals. Well, then there's a third mode, which I'm not so sure I dare to say it here, but as an economist or as a social scientist, we also recognize the fact that you can transform. And there might actually be a future without you keeping that animal you're trying to make robust. Well, when we look at these 3 modes, today I'm going to focus on this second one. How can these farms adapt to climate change? And basically, we're going to look at the feed. And so when we look at the European dairy system, they are mostly forage-based in Europe. We said we're going to look at the forage and how this changes. Climate change is already impacting. This is something we're going to also see. And what I liked really at the speaker before me, he said, well, things are going to look very different in different places. And this is exactly what my presentation is about, understanding how things will be different in different places. And so that's what we want to come up with, to show you where there is the biggest urgency to change or to adapt the systems, and actually also look at, well, let's be positive, they're also winners. What did we do? I said we don't look at animals, we look at farms. So we looked at the FADN, the European accountancy data at farm level. So we have a data set, not of animals, but of farms. And we have enhanced that data set with climatic data so that we know more about in which context these farms are. In a simple way, we put that in a regression model. We'll come back to that, don't worry. And we use that regression model then to predict the future. And how did we do that? Is we actually used what is called the global agroecological zones from FAO, where you have the current and the future production of most crops. And if you're really interested in exact which scenario we used, it's specified there. It's a jungle, I promise. Let's more look at this model. It's a simple regression model. I think I need to stand here. A regression model where we start at trying to explain the dairy production per hectare. And remember, we're looking at farms. And so for every farm, we calculate.
Keep going. Yes.
Okay. Forage yield, which is based on the real weight of the feed ratio that we could derive from FADN data. Then we added a whole bunch of more economic data. That's the oh, I have a pointer. Look at this. This part here is or economic variables, and they're supposed to capture your farming systems, which are different across Europe. And here we have a climatic variable. So remember, we combined that with climatic data so that we could correct also for the climatic context. And what you see it happening, so we're going to replace this variable with future data, with future yields. So this future yield, so how did they look like? So we actually focused on 4 different crops. The first was maize at the top. And you see, actually you see it coming, there are winners. You see the greener it is, the higher is your future productivity. And I think even from the back, you see this map becoming greener. The second 2 are grass. This is pasture grass, and the bottom one is pasture legumes. And you see a slight pattern change, and they are not really, I don't think you see much in the back. It's because they are not so big. And that's already telling you that grass-based systems will not experience so much big changes. And alfalfa at the bottom, that really also can have high yields. So this is the variable, so the climatic data that went into the model to predict the future. And what did we find? Well, this is going to be a lesson of European geography, just in case. This is our baseline. This is milk productivity per hectare. And we actually find the big known hotspots, the Netherlands, Denmark, northern Spain, and northern Italy. So these 2 maps are showing the percentage change compared to this. So the first thing that is striking in the 30s and the 50s is that we have clear losers. Well, France is a striking one, but also Hungary. And in the 50s, we see northern Italy really becoming really, really red. Well, is it a problem or not? Well, we can discuss. France has a relatively low productivity per hectare, so yes, it's a big loss, but in volumes at the end, it might be okay. But I think here in Italy, it's a very intensive dairy production, and it's going to be massively losing. And so if you ask me, where is the biggest urgency to develop new systems, it's about here. I think one interesting part is Spain, northern Spain. We see it's very intensive. Well, the impact in the future is very low. Well, we just said Italy is very high. What's the big difference here? The big difference here is that the farms who are here are already depending on imported feed. So they are actually not really influenced by their own forage because the big part of their feed is already imported. So that's what we see here, is that this map is actually not saying where you won't have dairy, it's saying something about where you need to change the system. The other part we need to look at as well, I see quite a bit of green also. So we have the winners, and we see that the Nordic countries really get more and get higher productivity, and this is really achieved through the fact that they have a higher productivity in their feed. I think that was, in summary, some of the results. I won't go back to that. Well, what does this really mean? The first thing it's really about, it's not about saying, well, France is not going to produce milk. It's saying, well, France needs to think about what needs to be changed so that we can keep dairy going. There are mitigation options, and we saw the example of Spain. You can adapt your forage choice to future environment, but we believe that this is probably also come with a genetic change that we haven't looked at. We did an interesting experiment. We obliged all farmers we had in the model to produce to the optimum of the best forage in their area. And if we do that, they all can produce more milk. The problem we all know is even today, these farmers are not producing the optimum. So this is a very theoretical concept, and we think we should really start discussing on how to redesign those systems so that they match their context and can produce milk also in the future. One limitation of the work we have done, and that it needs really to be pointed out, is that we look at yearly data. So we don't look at heat waves, which still need to be addressed. And that's when it goes to robustness and what all the people before me were talking about. And so we really think we need to start reviewing how to adjust not just the animals, but the systems as a whole. And my claim, my really personal claim, is we should also think about allowing farmers to switch in the worst case when there is better alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much.